Netflix. Netflix started out as a rental DVD company, and a little bit like Blockbusters, just they would send it to you at home. And at some point, they realized that maybe they wanted to switch their business model, and they hired anthropologists to look at how people actually watched movies and what kind of relationship they had, how did it matter in their lives. And anthropologists, after a long study, came back and they said, we have found nothing useful. The only thing we found was that people actually tend to binge watch stuff and then they feel bad about it. And Netflix exactly went like, blink, really? And suddenly they just started releasing series all at once, and it became a streaming service that everybody started embracing because of that sort of addictive component to having all the series all at once as opposed to one every week or something
Yeah,
like that.
that's so funny. We found nothing useful, just the crux of your new business model.
Exactly. So
Oh,
obviously, it's not just anthropologists who did that. It's probably a combination, a team effort of other people. But
mm,
having that sort of insights into how people really feel about a certain product or idea or project is really crucial for any new business.
yeah. This is, I'm glad you've brought that up because you've almost just gotten to the first question I wanted to ask. I had a few more great cheesy icebreakers, which I'm sad I won't be able to use now. But one of the first questions I actually had was, why do you think anthropology is important? And this is actually a question of what is anthropology? Because the study of people, if you want to take like the dictionary definition, is incredibly broad. I think a lot of people are very confused with what it means. This is something that's particularly pertinent to say the people I'm trying to serve, because as young people, we know now that young people want meaning more than anything else in the workplace. And going to university often feels like a tug of war between what's practical and what you're passionate about. And I feel like the moment someone sees a title like diplomat, soldier, spy, the deep state, it's like, what? This is so far apart from like my other random how to market better classes. So
Yeah.
yeah, how do you understand what anthropology is?
Look, I think for me personally, anthropology was a way to marry a career with something I was passionate about. So, really trying to find something meaningful to do that also allowed me to have a future and an income and something that, was practical at the same time. You can think about anthropology as the ability of understanding the world around you and through people. And so you're really trying to say, look, the economy, the state, the deep state, all of these are things that exist, are material, are out there, but they're also constructs of people's attitudes, and they're constructs of people's culture, and they're also made of people, right? So if we understand people, we're able to understand those other broader processes, and we can intervene and interact with them.
Mm,
So, the reason why anthropologists today is particularly useful is that an increasing number of customers and companies and even public services are trying to understand the people that they are dealing with, their customers or their own internal employees, and they realize that just doing a survey it won't do it, because a survey doesn't give you enough information. It gives you some information, but you probably need other kind of more deep understanding of relationship and people's imaginations or dreams or aspirations. So that's where anthropology really becomes not only something that you can be passionate about, doing some kind of adventure somewhere, which is typically how people get drawn to anthropology, the ability of going to a faraway place and
yes.
discover something, that nobody else has seen, maybe.
Mm,
But today, increasingly, that capacity, that skill becomes useful also for trying to find a job, even within, things like consultancies or the public sector or NGOs, where they're looking at people with those specific research skills and abilities to understand and provide insights based on human-centered, if you want,
mm.
understandings of the world.
Yeah, such a fantastic answer. There's so much I want to dig into there. And one question that I'm going to pin for later is I would love to talk a bit about success stories from
Mm.
anthropology. But I'm going to pin that for now because I just want to get a bit more of an understanding of um, the subject. Really, there's actually only two questions in this entire interview. The first is, what is anthropology as a subject or discipline? And the second is, what is it as a career? So we're still
Yep.
in part one here.
Sounds
I want to ask, yeah, very structured. I wanted to ask you, what do you view as the most important principles of anthropology? If you had to deconstruct it, right, into its building blocks, what would the foundation be?
I would say two, maybe three things. One is be curious. And so a principle that guides all of us is to really be curious about things that we take for granted, but we realize that actually might look very differently in practice. And so I don't know if you ever hear about, politicians and media talking about corruption, for instance. And coming from Italy, that's something that is very painful for many of us who feel that their perspectives are hard to reach because of corruption. And so it's something very both personal and like infuriating, really.
Mm.
But if, as you are an anthropologist, you might be thinking about how corruption is more complicated. And so you could think about, well, is corruption very different from lobbying, for instance, or are those the same things? And is corruption maybe a way in which you try to distribute resources at a moment of crisis or in places where there isn't enough? So then you start thinking about, well, who is doing these things called corruption? How is it, really practiced? And you realize that in some cases, it's actually a way to avoid things like market forces from dominating the country, right? So you have networks of people coming together to keep out other forces that may be more disruptive. And you can make argument about whether corruption is better than pure neoliberal markets or not. But the point is, you don't take for granted the idea that corruption is necessarily bad for everybody everywhere, right? You try to think about, what does it mean for people who actually do it, and why do they do it, and whose fault, if you want, is it? Is it people's own bad nature, if you want, or is it something else that is pushing people to do certain things in certain circumstances? So being curious and not taking things for granted is number one, I think. In the past, really, it meant being curious also about people who had a completely different livelihood compared to ours. And so typically anthropologists went to places where there were tribes or groups of remote populations who believed in completely different entities or ways of being compared to us. Today we can do the same on our own cultures or different cultures that we have. Number two, I would say, anthropologists tend to have an eye for the little guys, if you want. And so I think there's people like me who are doing research at different levels. And so both with very powerful financial analysts or, state actors or entrepreneurs, but also then with construction workers. And historically, at least, anthropology is a discipline that is very attentive to people who are marginalized and who are members who don't have really a voice to speak with in the public domain. And so a lot of what anthropologists find very rewarding is the ability of collecting those voices and giving it a space in the public discussion. And then possibly, the third principle of anthropology is trying to do no harm in the world. And it's an ethical principle. It's the idea that, you should discover something, and maybe as a researcher, that's what you do, but you should also think about what you leave behind. And so you're not just there to extract knowledge, you're not just there to create a new exciting theory, but you're there to propose something that, at least does no harm, but possibly does something positive for the world. I think those are the three guiding principles within anthropology that everybody really declines in different senses. Some people look more at culture. Some other anthropologists think more about the material structures that regulate our lives. Some people are in tune with political issues. Others look at medical anthropology.
Yep.
There is a lot of talk about that, especially now because of COVID, and thinking about, how is it that all this new research is going to change our lives? So there's various domains in which anthropologists apply those principles, but I would say those are the three key elements.